Call this meeting to order. Today is May the 9th, 2017. It's in the Teacher Education Center. It's the Superintendent's Strategic Planning Workshop, and it is being televised, so smile big. I'll turn it over to the Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank everyone for coming today. We have a lot to cover and only a 3-hour time window, so we'll try to move as quickly as we can. As everyone is aware, we are engaged in a strategic planning process. One of the steps in that strategic planning process was an engagement phase where we tried to get as much input from our community as we could to help us develop the strategic plan. The strategic plan is going to be the work of not just staff here alone, but of many people that are involved, the stakeholders, and it impacts a lot of people here in our community. So we partnered with Battelle for Kids for this process, and we have 2 representatives from Battelle for Kids here with us today. They're going to take us through an analysis of all the information that was gathered during that engagement phase, and then actually ask for some input and feedback from the board as to how we take that information and move forward. They did conduct a session with cabinet members this morning and got our feedback and that kind of thing. They're going to share that with you later on today. But the first thing to do is to dig into the data that was compiled through face-to-face interviews, online surveys, and all kinds of other methods of gathering information. And then to see what that looks like collated into different areas and how we can move forward from there. Mike Nicholson is here from Battelle, and Dr. Moore, who you might have remembered from the last time they were here. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moore and Mr. Nicholson, and they're going to take it from here. But this is going to be a bit of an interactive session, especially when we get towards the end. So we'll be asking for your feedback as we get into the second, third, or third of the program. So, Mike, are you taking it?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Bell. Hi, my name is Mike Nicholson. I'm with Battelle for Kids. I'm a senior. It was not. Can you hear me?
Can you turn the wireless on? It's one or the other. I can't have it.
Oh. Hello? Does that
Good
work?
now.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks. Okay, put that away. Okay, thank you. So I'm a senior director with research and evaluation from Battelle for Kids. I'm here with Bobby Moore. We work together on this along with a couple people back at the Columbus office. Let me go through. You have some supporting documents here, so let me be sure you have those. The top one should be the PowerPoint that we're going to go over as a way to summarize all the information. Then you have an executive summary that you should have received, I think, last Friday or thereabouts, and then a more detailed report along with that, and then there should be a single page that summarizes our SWOT analysis. Does everybody have those? Okay. Then as Dr. Rendell said, we do have quite a bit to go over, so let's go ahead and do that. Dr. Rendell nailed the objectives. We're going to understand the findings from the SWOT analysis and the online survey. A lot of this will be from the online survey, but it does inform the broader assess and engage phases that gather up all this information. We're very interested in your feedback regarding this, so it can help chart direction for the cabinet team to draft the strategic plan. And then at the end, we're going to share next steps so we have a common understanding about what the path forward looks like. Does that sound good? Okay. So this is a summary of what I'll call the reach of the assess and engage phases of the strategic planning process. As you know, you were involved early on with meeting with, I believe it was Suzanne and Kim from Battelle for Kids as they interviewed you for your thoughts, along with the cabinet members back in early February and then later in February. Community engagement interviews, and those were about 25, 26 identified groups to meet with to be sure we got their input. And then there was a town hall meeting, I believe it was in this facility. And then the online survey then took place shortly after the town hall meeting and lasted for a month. And during that time, there were 463 people that did participate in that. So a duplicate count at the end is about 714 people. There could be some overlap, and some of the people that participated in one phase could have participated in another. At the end of the day, I think you can safely say hundreds of people will have informed this strategic plan survey. When you look...
I want to touch base a couple things there real quick.
Sure.
Just a reminder, when we came down to the individual interviews, that was individual time with each board member. But today you have the responsibility of working as a board.
So the fact that we're in a work session today, when Mike comes up and we start facilitating some sessions, we'll need to get some consensus as an agreement, as a group, in terms of which way we go forward, in terms of naming some of the stages we're going to do and all that. So again, today you're actually working as a board. And we really value the individual time, but that was almost doing like individual interviews. And also the community engagement interviews, those were, we talked about this morning, those were very purposeful. Those were people we identified, all the different groups in Vero Beach, that we wanted to make sure they had a voice in helping come out with our strategic plan. So we really appreciate the fact that I know the board and the cabinet identified specific groups that we wanted to make sure we captured some of their voices.
Okay, so now we're going to focus some attention on the results from the online survey. So when you look at the affiliations or the representation of people who participate in the survey, there are 463. That includes, we had two surveys, an English survey and a Spanish survey. 17 people participated in the Spanish survey. The rest were on the English survey. And these were the categories of respondents. And this is about what you'd expect from a district survey about strategic planning. The first three categories represent about 85% of those who participated. And again, that's about what you'd expect with a district online survey. How representative this was from the community at large, it's not obvious at this point, but these are the people who did step forward and engage and participate in this. And again, I think this will be very important to help inform the process for going forward. The survey had addressed several of the items that you'd want in a strategic plan, mainly about the teaching and learning. You can see that dominates it: curriculum, assessment questions, learning conditions, communication, and parent-community involvement. This is the same, and it followed the same type of questions that were asked during the interviews as well. So that makes sense. Consistency. We're just trying to find another medium to bring more voice into the strategic planning process. The first question you just saw has to do with curriculum. In your opinion, what knowledge and skills do today's students need to be successful after they graduate? Please rank your choices. So the format of the question was they were to rank the orders of the selected responses that were made available to them. And you see that across the bottom of this chart. These were the choices they had to choose from. There was another choice that said other in many of these questions, but I'll tell you, when they did other, very few people, there was not more than 17% answered that other. And when you looked and factor analyzed the responses that were in the other, they didn't materialize to an important cluster. They were splintered. That's another way of doing is allowing is, did we miss any large buckets over here? And when you look at the response that were in the other column, it didn't seem like we missed any large buckets, not with the people who responded to the survey. So of the selected responses that are available, these are what's called error bars, because it was a mean of the scale, and those are estimates. If you take into account the variation in the number of people that answered it, you can build a 95% confidence interval for where that true mean was, and that's what's plotted here. So this 5 is a boundary that separates what I'll say the lower rated values, 1 through 4, from 5 through 8. So you can see which ones the people on average say, that's a pretty higher priority. It's above the 5 line. And you can see these right here. Of the respondents, the ones that were deemed as a lower priority were right here. And that's for what is right now. That doesn't mean if the district decides that we want to place more emphasis on some other ones, then that helps inform the education communication going forward. But as it is right now, you can see this is where how the 463 people responded as a whole to prioritizing these curricular areas or these skill areas. Now, what's interesting about this is with 463 people you see coming from different constituents in the district, was there anything to find out when you disaggregated the data, when you pulled them apart? And one way to do that is to see if there's any different perceptions between the internal constituents versus the external constituents. So I pulled that apart right here, and I called it district staff. 1 means yes, that they are district staff. 0 means no, that they were external staff. They're not external staff, they're external constituents. So district staff versus, or as compared to parents, community members, community leaders, and so forth. This is the only question where this really spiked out to have a real interesting difference in trend or difference in pattern. It was almost flipped. for these 4 areas. These are the 4 areas where there was a statistical difference between how the district staff answered and how the non-district staff answered. Does that make sense? So all the other areas that are not included on here, they were, for all intents and purposes, they answered very similarly. Here, they answered different. If you look at, for instance, social emotional skills, right here. So the non-district staff rated that, what I'll say is qualitatively lower than district staff. When there's a difference, when the error bars are shifted like that, that means there's a qualitative or systemic difference to how they were responding to the question. When you look over at academic skills, now they're all at 5 or above, so they all say they're important, but it's magnitude of importance at this point. So here the district staff said, yeah, it's important, but it's not quite what the outside membership had perceived. Now, why might this be important to know? Because if there's any district shift in how they're emphasizing social emotional, academic, they know that the messaging might be different with who they're talking to right here. And you might ask, well, why does district staff see it differently as non-district staff? And that's something we can unpack as we go forward. I'll tell you, from across the education industry, this is a trend that's not unique to here. That the educators tend to see that the social emotional are not, it's not an either or. The social emotional can be a means to getting a higher academic achievement and academic skills. It's not, if we place emphasis on social emotional, it's going to take away from that. As a matter of fact, some areas see that because of not attention to social emotional, it can be getting in the way of the academic. So this is something that we can unpack further as we go forward, but I thought this is a very interesting difference here that might be important to know.
Excuse me.
Chair.
Yes.
But I have to tell you, if you go by your front page numbers, it's like a 3-to-1, because your district staff was 100, if I'm interpreting this right, district staff is 143, whereas if you add the current student, community member, former student, and other into it, your numbers are higher with those. So I would say that 0 has more value.
You're saying that, I see what you're
If you're
saying.
using your survey numbers, you have a 3-to-1 or at least a 2-to-1. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but that won't affect the magnitude at which they gave values to these skills. What it can do is it can shrink, because the N size, can influence the size of the confidence interval, but it's not going to necessarily shift where that estimate is. That's, because they have more numbers doesn't mean the bar is going to go higher. It just means how much error is around that estimate, but it's not going to change the magnitude of the estimate itself.
As far as their value or
Correct.
yes, but if their value number might be the same, I'm not sure how but what I'm saying is you will have 300 people on the non-staff, and you're going to only have 143 on the 1.
Yeah, well, I understand what Mrs. Simchak is saying, is that you would compare these non-district staff versus district staff, but know that we had 3 times as many responses by non-district staff.
That's what I'm saying, Mike. So that so even though they're flip-flopped, 0 is double the value, double the importance, because you have twice as many people on that side. You don't have 100 on 0 and 100 on 1. You have 228 on 0 and you have 143
So the
on
assumption
1.
always goes back to how well do these groups represent who they're,
That's
And that would
Got
be
it.
and that would be my question
okay.
in that.
And that's why we need to triangulate this with other sources of information.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
are we going to, so this is very important area that I think we do need to discuss, but I understand we need to move forward with it. So this is something we will come back to, or we discuss it now? How does this work?
It does come up later in conversation when we start to set priorities and goals, what we're going to focus on. And this will be something that's discussed.
Okay, so do we discuss this now, some thoughts that I had regarding this specific, or do we wait? That's the question. I don't want to interrupt.
I would suggest that we keep going, because it might come up
That's fine.
another opportunity to discuss it.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so Mike, we can keep going.
Oh, okay. So this is the next question. What are other ways to recognize student success? And this has assessment implications, because if you're going to recognize it, you have to be able to assess it and identify it properly. This question is actually related to some federal legislation. The ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, which pushes states to identify other ways of recognizing student success. So this is actually kind of parallel with federal legislation that's going on. There seems to be a movement that most people seem to understand that a student success and maturing and developing probably shouldn't be limited to just academic. Are there other ways to do it? So that's what this question gets at. So here, again, if we see 5 as just a way to start making some general interpretations of this, we see that these 4 areas, connecting sources of information for problem solving, decision making, working with peers, and thinking independently, we're seeing in the aggregate as more important than portfolio work, how much passion a student exhibits for the, learning, and then happiness. What's interesting maybe about this is that those 4 top areas, no doubt, are deeper and more, can be deeper and more rigorous examples of learning. They also come with it probably more challenging ways to assess, but they probably shouldn't stop folks from trying to figure out how to assess it. Just a comment on the lower prioritized ones, as it was measured during the survey, is if any of you have ever followed Sean Akers' work or other work about what's called happiness, and sometimes that's not a great label. Some people call it being rationally optimistic, being positive. Again, is that really separate from learning? If the kids were enjoying and having more positive emotions with regard to schooling, could that help their learning? So again, this is just a snapshot of right now. If there's ever a desire to prioritize, at least we know where maybe this sample of folks are coming from. What are the greatest barriers to achieving student success for Indian River students? Okay, so if we were to take care of these barriers, could that help knock down some challenges on the way to greater learning? We see much more variation, interestingly enough, much more variation in these responses. The top 2 off to the left, student discipline and student motivation, what's interesting about that are those are probably, of all the ones that are listed on there, the most student-oriented. The other ones are more societal or structural factors. Those could be seen as student-level factors, the level of their motivation, the discipline. So those 2, the student-level ones, came out the top. And furthermore, what might be interesting is, are those 2 related? If students were more motivated, could that help the discipline? Just to see if there's a connection there. But the other ones on there are more structural. Interesting to note, probably 2 of the lowest ones. It's not that those are not seen as important, but perhaps folks are saying, right now, they don't seem to be a barrier for greater learning. It's not saying they're not important. It's just, it was asked about what are the greatest barriers. It's not really a value judgment on those, but right now it looks like those might not be barriers on the way to greater learning. I would distinguish, though, between safety and student discipline. That one might be seen as more physical safety, not so much behavior oriented. Now, these were more of the open-ended items on the survey. So this is where there were no selected responses. This is where there's a text box, and people were invited to enter whatever their comments or thoughts were. So this one, in what ways can the district better meet the diverse needs of its students to ensure equal opportunities? So of the 463, about half didn't offer a response. Half did. So about 230 people did offer a response to this. Of the 230 that offer a response, what we need to do in analyzing what's called this qualitative information is you have to go through and code them. You have to reach each comment and code them. And what you're looking for are factors that thread across similar comments. So after doing what we call a factor analysis on this, if you look off to the left, were there any broad themes of these? And there were no meta themes on this. They were what I call like splintering. And if you order them in order of frequency, once you account for the blank, the next highest frequency was only 6.3%. Okay, so from here, there doesn't seem to be what might be called a broad consensus or a broad mandate about looking into better meeting the needs of diverse learners this way. There are a lot of different ideas.
Excuse me, question, Laura.
I'm sorry.
No, thank you. When I was looking through this, I did notice that several of the questions had blanks where it wasn't filled in. Why would that be?
I'm sorry. Can you give me an example, please?
Right here, you have 230. So you think that 230? To me, I just felt like this the setup was very confusing when I went in to do it. So I don't understand, if we had 400 and something, we only had 200 and something that actually responded, so you're saying 230 didn't respond?
Correct.
Correct.
So this is about question 8 or 9, so it's getting into the survey. And this is typical what you see with open-ended responses. You tend to see a drop-off in the response rate. People either feel like, there are a couple things that could go on. People can feel like most of this has been addressed, I'm good, or it's called survey fatigue. They could say, I'm done,
Well, I can tell you personally, when I went on to do this, I felt the survey was very confusing. And, you know, you get through and you have to put what's the most important, what's the second most important. You know, when I looked at these, I would have much rather had seen what are your top 3 priorities versus, because I found several that to me were just as important as the next. So it was hard for me to validate this one is number 1 and this one is number 2 when I felt they were equal. So, you know, at this point, and there was a couple that I didn't even respond because I didn't feel like I was answering the question correctly. So I was wondering, it's interesting to see this because, you know, I personally see why they didn't answer this.
Mr. Cersey?
Yes.
I did not have the same experience. When I took the survey, I was comfortable with using it. Did you, I personally, when the survey first came out, had some feedback about maybe there wasn't a clear direction about 1 being most important or 8 being most important, and so I kind of gave some feedback to Dr. Rendell about that. But I personally was comfortable with the survey, and I felt that I was able to navigate through it. It was fine for me personally
But
as a
I'm
parent.
just saying that.
No, I respect your opinion. I'm just
Right,
telling
right.
you my personal experience.
That, you know, if 1, 2, or 3 were of the same value to me of number 1, it was hard for me to choose which one do I want to put in the first slot.
That's a
So-
typical forced choice.
So I didn't want to
Yeah.
devalue you know, the second number 1. So, you know, I had chosen on a couple of them just not to respond. So,
Well, you know, really, that's the challenge of a superintendent leading a school district too, is that if you prioritize everything, then you have no priorities. So by having people get in there and identify 8 or 9 different priorities and then force them to rank what they think, it also gives the consumer and the community member an understanding that, wow, these are all priorities, but we do need to focus on 2 or 3 of them, or we're not going to do any of them very well. And back to the blanks, the boxes, that's typical in any survey. In fact, when your kids take the state surveys, many of them will do the multiple choice, and they'll leave the open responses empty. And typically, it's like Mike said, it's either just fatigue or they're tired of the survey. But we appreciate the feedback on that.
I have one more question. So on another area, and I see it here, 55 other suggestions comprise the remaining 36% of the responses. Is there some listing of what some of the other suggestions were? Are we going to see at some, okay,
yeah. Yes, there are.
right, okay,
Yeah, we have the compendium, or I guess if that's the right word, of all of the responses.
Right.
So you can see every single, yes, sir,
So I'm
every
just
single
sharing.
response.
Yes, it's in a PDF. This is a SurveyMonkey format, so we just have the PDF over of all the raw data.
So I would just like to ask, what was, as a parent, when you were filling it out, what was your opinion of the survey itself?
Very meta. Thank you. I noticed here on page 5, it says 0 board members took this. Stealth testers?
I don't, no, sorry. I actually don't remember there being a board member area to select from the drop-down box. I responded as a parent, because I see myself as a parent first.
You mean you didn't get on twice, Tiffany, and do it as a board member and a parent?
I did not.
and skew
That's
our
why there's
data?
more numbers on the.
Yeah, that's why there's more numbers. Thank you, Dale. That's
And
great.
to that point, I mean, we're almost splitting hairs here on some of these. I mean, to get too far ahead, but on point 3 of page 2, in the, is this the full? Yeah, the full.
You're jumping.
I know, but
Just let
in
them get through
response,
it.
sort of in response to those 166 other items is, I mean, we're talking N being 287 versus 285, 1 to 2. I mean, that's statistically a
Well,
tie.
and that's part of the reason why, you know, when you get down to, you know, this is order in terms of frequency. When you get down to below 1.9%, it would be interesting to see what those are. But I think the value in this is where you see patterns
Right.
come out.
I understand that.
But I know the curiosity could be, what were the other ones on?
Well, I'm just curious if it was, you
Yeah.
know, what,
You know, from an optimist standpoint,
Taco Tuesday.
if I'm doing the survey and I have this question popped up, I might think, well, you know what, the school district's doing a lot of already great things, I don't need to respond there. So, you know, from a good standpoint that you're doing a great job, and I just don't have anything else to add, so I'm gonna leave it blank. That's- yeah.
Rationally optimistic.
So that's always a really good possibility.
So this was the first open-ended response on first text box answer question, and it had the least participation. Some other open-ended responses that happened afterward had more participation. So it wasn't necessarily, I don't think, the fatigue, it was, I didn't really have an answer for that one, so I'm going to the next one.
right?
So there were no discernible patterns or themes to this question.
So the next one was, what does providing safe and secure learning environments mean to you? So with this one, as Dr. Rendell had suggested, this one had a little bit more participation rate. What's different about this one is that there was a higher order factor on this one. So again, whenever you qualitatively analyze these, you code the responses and you look to see if they're themes. So you can start bundling these responses together. And sometimes when you see the different bundling, you can see like a meta bundling on that. So if you look at the bundling, okay, so for 94 people, they felt that a safe and secure learning environment meant that student behavior was properly addressed. The next one, 62 people, their thread was ensuring that the environment is free from physical harm. This is more of a physical aspect, not just behavioral. It's safety. Third one added from another way, said, no, what safe and secure means to me is that students are cared for, respected, and nurtured, more of a positive, a strength-based approach, not a deficit-based approach. So when you start looking at these together, look over to the leftmost column, it looked like all the responses, the vast majority of responses, what they had in common, they were all possible approaches for addressing safe and secure learning environments. And then you had some down, there's 20 I couldn't decipher, they were too vague. It was hard to tell where they were going. And then there was another one set that if you support teachers better, perhaps that would help address student or safe and security.
Thank you. And that kind of brings me to my question. Do you get a sense, sometimes when surveys are pushed out, different special interest groups or stakeholder groups, call them those, sort of work together to present a certain viewpoint collaboratively? I mean, I'm not talking, like the same email from 300 people, but along those same lines, like same keywords start to pop in, or well, I mean, I guess that's. But did you see any of that with this? Like different groups sort of maybe doing coordinated
There were
responses?
times you wondered, but they never bubbled up to be a major driver in this. There are times you thought you saw some patterns in that, but nothing that seemed like, okay, this is really skewed the information. But there were times where you wondered.
Okay.
Well, there's some
What we
key-
did this morning with the cabinet and what we're doing with you two, I mean, there's perception and there's truth. Whenever you collect data, there's perception and there's truth. What we want to do today is validate from you, are these things that you hear from your constituents? Are these things that you hear in your community? And as we go forward, that's just a real important piece of this process.
Laura?
I just want to put on record that I'm very concerned that with 18,000 students, that, and we do that times two, if there's a parent or a grandparent involved in raising the student, that we're, I look at the percentage here, and I look at the frequency, and we look at, just a little over 200 response. To me, this is not a good representation of what's really, I think we should look at trying to do another survey. I'm very disappointed in the responses that we've gotten.
And I'm glad you brought that up, but the reality of it is you could do second, third, and fourth survey, and let me just use a comparison of voting. We have 130,000 people in the community, 95,000, I think, registered voters, and at the most, on a very big year, you'll get 28,000 people out. So that's just, so if you look, you're right. So this is not even 10%. This is less than 5%.
2.5%.
Thank you. So you must be thinking like either that or you're a real wizard at math. You-
No, I bust out my phone, which I know is.
So you have to take it for face value. We asked for community. We asked to get people involved in committees, but we could just keep taking and taking. Maybe we raise it about 100 or 200. We just can't, do that. But it's important that we make the opportunity. It's important that we make the ability to see how the trend is. But at some point, we're going to have to use our elective 5 different or 5 same, or at least a 3-2 consensus feeling on how our strategic plan as a district goes. We make every opportunity that we can, but I just don't feel that another survey is going to, what if it was 100% improvement? It's still only going to be 800 people, which is still not 10%
Ms.
of
Justice.
potential parents.
But it does have 5%
Thank you very much.
representation.
So previously, we were using the superintendent's goals as the driving force for the planning for the school district. And the superintendent did that on his own, or Dr.
Yeah.
Adams did that somewhat, with some, but this process is much more transparent than the other process was. And I
Yes.
think we're sitting here now as a board, looking at some community feedback, and we're sitting here having a conversation about the direction of the school district as elected officials who have constituents who do contact us. We have many conversations. So I actually have a lot of confidence in this process as being probably the most transparent it's been in Indian River County for years. So I'm excited to continue to move forward with this.
Yeah, I just want to add just a couple, Dale, I really appreciate what you brought up, and we know that when we survey, that we get sometimes not the great, response rate. We tried to offset that by identifying specific groups that we wanted to bring together, and we reached out to those groups. In fact, we relied on the board the last time I was here to identify some of those groups. So we were really encouraged that there were particular representation from all the different groups, whether it was partnerships, whether it was NCAACP, whether it was some of the other foundations, they came together and shared their voice, and we've tried to capture those. And then just another piece, I remember I was here in August, actually doing a keynote at Indian River, and you guys, Dr. Rendell and the board had a tax meeting that night, a town meeting, and I think there was like less than 20 people that had showed up for that. And that was about raising taxes, which is really a pretty prominent piece, right? I think when you're talking about taxes, people are going to show up and have a voice. Well, John, you're laughing, but that night when, I heard that there was only like 20 people, so to reach out and get about 700 contacts and purposeful 200 and something, I think now as a board, you can just validate, is this the voice? Is this your constituents? And today we can get some direction in going forward with the strategic plan.
And I do want to make a comment because a lot of times board members come and say, this is the best that it's ever been because I've been on it. But that's not true. It's just a different way and a different approach. But what I will say is that what's good about this process is that each of us get out there and pound the pavement, and we hear. But this is either a confirmation of what we hear, and also what I would value very much in this group is our partners, I see one in the audience as well, is the partnerships that we have, because we can't do it alone. And so I hold a lot of value with what the partnerships have said, because I think that they represent an umbrella, a certain large amount of group as well. So I think it's a great process. I think it's, certainly maybe, a different way of doing it. But, and again, it wasn't that the superintendent would tell us what they were going to do. We would collectively decide, what was important to us. And let me tell you something. Maybe not today, I will agree with that, but other boards were very vastly different in what they felt was important. Somebody felt that teeth cleaning and molar covering, because if a tooth was sore, how could a child concentrate? And someone else felt safety was better. So that you may find that at the end of this anyway.
Like
So what I'm saying is, safe,
Dentists supported me
it's just,
heavily, is all I'm saying.
yeah, so, but I think it's a great process, and like I said, that's why I don't want to get too hung up on it, because there's a lot of information, but in the end, it's only 400 and something people, so
It's less than
we got to
that,
get
I'm sure.
get through it.
You indicated that you had, when you started this process, you identified the groups that you wanted to bring in.
We were told which groups to target
Okay,
specifically.
well, I guess my question is, did you already know where you wanted to be before you selected those groups? I mean, there's a thing, an appraisal, it's called an MAI appraisal, made as instructed And I'm just wondering if we already, or somebody told you where we wanted to be, and you're devising this plan to make sure that we get to where somebody told you we wanted to be.
Actually, in our individual board meetings, we heard from different board members, different constituents we should probably interview, and then we relied on the cabinet to tell us which groups we need to go out and get to.
Okay.
So,
Can I just put on record that each board member, we approximately got about 30 minutes to meet with the group. I don't, it was very rushed. I don't feel like it was, I really got to get through the items I wanted to get through. And I know Ms. Justice, I had actually taken some of her time, and I don't feel like she had a,
Oh, no, I was fine with my, I'm sorry, yes, thank you
Okay.
for bringing that up. I felt fine with my time. I was prepared for that meeting. I had a list and outline that I wanted to go through, some things that were important to me that I wanted to highlight, as well as some community groups that I thought might be able to give some feedback. So personally, I was comfortable with it because I was prepared. But thank you.
Dr. Moore, if you remember, I came in with about 6 pages of typed notes, and I felt like that I had only got through about 4 pages. And as a board member, I don't feel like I adequately got to get through what was important to me, especially coming off of a year and a half of campaigning and listening to constituents and getting out to the schools and visiting the schools. So I do have a concern that not enough time, so I'm hoping that we can now discuss what we weren't able to discuss on our one-on-one time.
and Laura, I think you're right, you had that, but I think we asked you to leave your sheets behind too. I think you took those with you because we wanted to get all your notes, because we know you felt, I think you had to leave because we actually stayed with you till the end because we split up to go with Tiffany. But at that time, it was individual interviews. We wanted to hear what you were hearing from your constituents and what you valued individually, and we knew we were going to come back and talk to you collectively as a board. So again, I apologize if one person or even a couple of you felt that that was rushed. That wasn't the intention. And by all means, if you had notes, anything you could leave behind, we could have taken those and put those in. So
Let's move ahead. Mike, 'cause-
So just one thing, as we see any of this information, it's important to triangulate against other information. So no single source of information should drive this. It should be the pattern across different parts of it, different information sources. Next one is, what's one recommendation you have for the district to improve communications with parents and community members? This is more of a selected response one, and this is how the frequency and the order with which the results came. More positive stories about what's going on with students in the classroom. We also heard that in other sources and other venues as well. Ways for families and community members to get involved in the classrooms, so there could be communication through involvement. And also improve communication through, is there a way that families and community members can build their own knowledge through some experiences or opportunities here in the district? Those are the top 3. Then you see some more electronic means towards the end, text updates, social media posts, newsletters, and so forth. Communication is one thing you'll see no matter what district you're in. Communication can always be something that can be looked at. In what ways can people like you support Indian River schools? Volunteering, sharing positive information about the schools, go to more school district events, just some more active, by your feet ways of participating. And people are always looking for opportunities like that.
I think the board should be encouraged by the feedback on this question. People want to help. They want to help our students, and they want to help spread the good news about all the things that are going on in the school district.
There's no blank number here? Is there? Did I miss it?
I don't see it.
Was it possible to leave this blank?
it wasn't open
This
to
was
new
a
question.
selection.
Oh, okay, got it, thank you. So this is like a second STEM question off of a top question? If this is important to you, then in which ways is this important?
No, this was a standalone question.
It was check all that apply.
It was multi-select.
Oh, okay.
That's why the
got it.
percentages add up more than 100.
Got it, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, I did not take the survey.
Okay. Now, this is talk about, Sean, to your point, talk about an open-ended text box. There was a question right at the end. Not questions, just a text box. Anything that we did not address, anything that you want to leave behind. So this was an invitation to share whatever hasn't been addressed. And so this was, again, probably not too surprisingly, this was the last question. So 25% of people did leave, but when you factor analyze those 110 comments are left behind, these were the items that were left behind, but no major cluster in them. So again, I think from one standpoint, where people, again, were invited to say, are there any overriding concerns or anything? At least it didn't come out in this question. It might come out somewhere else, but not in this question. There's a lot of different ideas, a lot of different comments. So that was the online survey. This is the text box at the end. Any questions, any comments at the end that you guys have about, that haven't been addressed about the online survey?
Last chance.
I'm just gonna, I didn't like the survey, I didn't like the questions, I didn't like the 1, 2, 3. So, and it seems like majority of the people that went on to take it were probably feeling the same by leaving the responses blank. So, as a board member who did take it, I didn't like it.
I don't really feel comfortable saying that the blank responses say that people felt that way. I don't believe that that's a,
Can I just say, that goes back to voting. Many people didn't vote for us on school board because it's down at the bottom. They got voted,
Sure,
you
they
have
voted
28,000
for-
voters, and
Voter
if you're down to
fatigue.
school board, it's 21,000. So voting fatigue versus
Last time
survey
around, they skipped
fatigue
the
is the
top
same. But I appreciate what you're saying. And you just got to take, for me, I got to take it as face value.
It's one source, again, one source of information.
Right.
Okay.
It's been a lot of years since I took an advanced stats course, but inferential statistics begin at what % of sample size of a population? That they become meaningful?
We can do a power analysis on that, and I'm sure ours didn't make it,
Right.
but it did capture those who did step forward and answer. And it's just like,
Right. Any poll's better than no poll.
Yeah.
Or-
well, and the important thing to
survey.
remember is that community, that, you had targeted community
Right.
groups, so
Yeah.
it's not just survey on the, it was a targeted approach to,
very few district surveys reach that power sample.
Okay.
Very few ever do. And that's the constant challenge with any district, is how do you reach the people who you're trying to, the ones who don't typically step forward, how do you reach them?
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm sure it took a lot of time and resources to put this survey together. And if we know that people don't respond to surveys, if you're telling me that, then why do we waste the time and resources to put this survey together, knowing by what you're telling me, that we're not going to have a good response anyways?
No, that's
I know.
what I said was, very few reach the statistical size, but you are capturing those who are stepping forward, and the ones who probably do tend to show up at the events, and who do tend to show up at the voting booths. You are capturing the ones who are stepping forward.
How would you suggest that it could be better?
Just like with our parent survey, we know that most of the schools are between 5, 13, some are struggling to get 20% of the parents to actually fill out the parent survey. It really should have been something that was pushed with inside the school to try to, I know I was out at Fellsmere, and they actually had computers set up in their front lobby, and every time parents were coming in, they were trying to capture parents to actually take the survey. I would have liked to have seen more of a push within the schools, like Fellsmere had conducted, to try to get a response, because we want the feedback of our parents. And just because they're busy or they didn't know to go online and do the survey, I don't, to me, that's unexcusable.
There was a Connect Ed call. I can only, because I'm up in the Sebastian area, hope that went to the whole district wide, but
Correct.
there was a Connect
Yeah.
Ed call as well.
Correct, it was in the newspaper as well,
Yeah.
Facebook page, Twitter, on the website.
We
But
do
I agree
e-blasts
with, I do feel though,
We do it through
that's
the
just a
Connect
call.
Ed. through the phone
When you
call
pick up
system.
your kid, it's a lot
Or
easier,
through
so I do agree
Focus?
with you.
We
Yeah,
can-
through Focus.
We can do an e-blast through Focus, can't we? Or no? Focus, not Focus. Yeah, Focus. Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
one
we-
now.
We use School Messenger, which is the old Connected, because it has a lot more contact in.
Okay.
And we found that reaching them through their phone, you get a lot more people than you do.
Right,
That's the biggest bang for your buck is the phone number.
okay. So is that a text? Do we send
It's a call.
texts? Oh, okay, so it's voice only. Do we have a text blast?
We're going to be able to do the text blast, and next year we'll do,
We're building the
Yep.
texting
That's
into
helpful.
that School Messenger.
Yep.
Trust me, I work in that world, and that's very helpful.
Laura?
Yeah, and it goes back to, if you're telling me to go online and take a survey, getting a call, if I'm driving, I'm not going to pull over on the side of the road, put in, look up the survey to do the survey. I think if we want someone to go online and do a survey, we need to send an email that says, here's the link to the survey, and not, I don't see where a phone call is very user-friendly in this situation.
Yes, sir, Sean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, and maybe this would help Mrs. Zork, I think maybe a longer survey period might be helpful, but I understand we have work to do and we have to have, have it finalized at some point. Did you track, like, number of responses per day in order to see, kind of when you're starting to hit the other side of that curve and you're getting diminishing returns, or you did? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
What about per school?
No.
The survey respondents didn't have to identify a school or anything like that. Anybody could go on and
I'm
do the
just curious
survey.
if they pushed it real hard at Fellsmere, and maybe they had more survey respondents than other
Right.
schools.
Our
but
data will be skewed.
I think with permission, remember the fine people of Indian River have voted you to be the school board and help guide the direction of this fine school system. And in terms of transparency, what you have done is you said, thank you for voting for me. But before we start developing the strategic plan, we want to reach out to you again. We want to reach out to you in focus groups. We want to reach out to you in interviews. And we're going to put an online survey so we could hear your voice again before we, as the elected officials, start to strategize with our superintendent and cabinet to build a great school system. So what you have done is extended yourself one more level of transparency and collaboration before you now circle the wagons and start to develop your strategy. So I applaud you. Not every superintendent and school board even do these surveys when they do their strategic plans. Sometimes school board members might say, well, we were elected, we know where we have to go, let's go ahead and close the door, write our strategic plan, and execute. So I really applaud the transparency and the process you guys have done. Like Mike said, it'd be great if we had 100% of people do this survey, but it would have been great if we had 100% of our people vote in the last election. But I think this is great information to go forward, and you can either be affirmed by some of this data, or you can think, well, you know what, here's some other things that I've heard in the community, and I'd like for us to address that in the strategic plan. And that's why we're here today back from Battelle for Kids. We've gotten this information from your community, and we want to come back and ask the board, is this what you've been hearing? Is this what you've heard? Let's collaborate and help Dr. Rendell and his staff put together a strategic plan that's going to make this a world-class system.
We have a lot more data to
Can we
get through.
move, yeah, I was going to ask you, Mr.
Justice.
Chair, can we move into the analysis? Are we able to do that?
I'm sorry?
Are we able to move into the analysis portion of the,
This one
Are we at a break point, or you want to go ahead and finish yours?
No, we got to keep going.
Yep,
awesome.
nice segue. Okay. So here's based on all the information that we had gathered, heard through those different modes of gathering information, the SWOT analysis, strengths, the opportunities, the weaknesses, and the threats. And the way this is organized, you probably picked up on this already. Am I still on?
You're good.
Okay, thanks.
You have a larger handout. Some of the text is smaller. That's what that one page is for, because it's a little bigger to read.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
So the way this is organized is if you were to draw a vertical line down the middle of this chart, these are more the internal factors, our internal strengths and our internal weaknesses or opportunities for improvement. These are more the external facing factors right here. The opportunities are the external ones. Factors are presenting themselves as, can we take advantage of this to improve student outcomes for kids? And then the threats, what's out there externally that can pose as challenges for us. And of course, if you do a horizontal line, more of the positive facing opportunities and factors are above the line, and then the ones that, again, pose as challenges are below that line. So we can take a look at them quadrant by quadrant. The first one, the strengths, and that's the people or resources to activate for improvement within the district. And that's what we had picked up on from various sources of information about what people were feeling pretty good about on there. I'll leave that for you to review it one more time if you have any questions or comments. No, they're not.
I do have a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ms. Justice?
Mr. Nicholson.
Yes, please.
Hi. So this information now is not just that online survey, but this is all of the different stakeholders that were supposed, so board members, community, teachers,
Correct.
including, okay.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. So there are definitely things here to feel good about. Student supports, the opportunities and the options for learning, the vision going forward, the teachers and principals, dedication. Now, I know this is considered a medium-sized district, I think, in Florida. Is that correct? I tell you, come from up north, this feels like a larger district. But I think just the fact you have thousands of people here, thousands of students and so forth, it still has a small-town feel to it, especially when you get into the schools themselves. You have several community partners, and certainly there's an appetite to celebrate successes. And as we saw on one of the survey questions, we see some federal legislation, are there other ways that we can extend that celebration to non-academic factors as well?
You know, we're all type A people, always trying to fix things. You should take a second and really celebrate. You know, look at, these are some really great results, what people are saying in your community about your schools.
Thank you.
Okay, do you want me to go ahead, or do you want to stay on this one a little longer?
Let's go.
Okay. So next one is weakness. Okay, issues to manage that can be controlled from within the district. Again, this is on the side of the chart that's internal facing. The first one, district needs to focus on a few things and do them well. That's probably one of the challenges we have with the strategic plan. Is there an aspect of less is more? Are there high leverage points that we can identify that'll create the biggest bang, create the biggest leverage for student and adult growth in the district? So that's going to be one of the challenges that we probably confront in the strategic plan. There are strong, this is interesting, there are strong school identities, but there's not a unified district identity. I know personally when I was going around doing the focus groups, one of the questions I asked each of the groups was, okay, if you were to be lifted up out of Indian River and placed in another outside of Indian River district, what would you miss? What affiliation would you, and that was hard for them to answer. They could answer the more local one with regard to the identity for the school. It was a little harder for the people to respond to if they were removed from the school or this district, what things would come to their mind about missing the most. And so that's an opportunity with the strategic plan. Is there a way we can strengthen what the district identity is along with that strong school identity?
This morning, some of our conversations came around that some districts actually brand their buildings and some brand their districts. And you know, Dr. Rendell and the cabinet really had a great idea about, you know, let's talk about this as a world-class system with a bunch of world-class schools, though. You know, all your schools are world-class. And let's focus on the fact that we do have a larger identity as a district, but it's about the great schools that we have.
And this next one we saw come out in other sources of information, just some questions and concerns about discipline and so forth. Counselors feel overwhelmed by workload. It's interesting, when you look at the industry standards for counselors, I think it's like 1 to 300. So it's almost like out of the gate, even from looking at their own background groups, their own trade groups, the counselors have a very tough job. Students need more time for real-world application of knowledge and skills. I think the press and quest for more time comes from a lot of different quarters. This is one of them. Communication should become a focus. We see that in a lot of different districts. I'm sorry. Dale, did you?
No, go ahead and finish, I'm sorry. But when you're done, I just
Okay.
would like to comment.
Large gaps in performance between African Americans and others, the achievement gap. And then finally, the district can feel political and hard to partner with for all. And a little bit of that is probably inherent in being a school district. You have a lot of different constituencies, and there's only a limited amount of resources. So I think that's kind of part of operating, leading a school district. How can we minimize that so people do feel a stronger connection to those who don't even have the same immediate interests? How can we bridge that? Okay.
I'm going back to an earlier comment because I'm very familiar with strategic plans, goals and objectives, measurable goals. And when you made a comment of, this would just be my shout out to my board, less is more, you really have to look at more like, and just because that's a weakness, like when you look at gaps, we've already taken steps. Now, when we get our grades or we get our performances, they're a year behind anyway. So so even though it might show up as a weakness in general, some of these we're already tackling. But if we were even to take our weaknesses and say 3 strategic plans, like I said, without getting so into the minutia, because as you said, you could go into, you've got so many bullet points there. I mean, you really have to have themes, not specifics. And then as you have the theme for a strategic plan, then you have to then, and if it's a 5-year strategic plan, you have to look for maybe 2 or 3 under that raw strategic plan to find measurable, goals that can be measured. And then, once you conquer it that year, you hope that you can continue with that, and maybe the second year add another, the third another, and a fourth. Because if we start with a strategic plan, and then I'm just shouting this out, my feeling, because I have a lot of experience in this, and not just here, if we start with so many things, he is right, we will never, because you cannot juggle those balls continually. You will find very little progress in each of them. So I just wanted, that's my thought.
Justice.
And you're right, I look at this and I see 2 areas and 3 areas that we are currently addressing. So, obviously, taking steps without even having that community feedback, that gives me a pretty good feeling about the fact that the district staff is in touch with what some of the challenges are that have been existing, and that it's not, some of these things aren't a surprise. We're taking steps to address them already. And I think, so that is really positive for me.
Yeah, the strategic plan is strategic, not what we're currently doing. Dale, I appreciate you. I remember you talking about your experience with that. So some of the things that you're already doing, you're already addressing, it does not need to be in the strategic plan. This is about what we're doing the next 5 years. And less is more. Let's focus on a few things and do them really, really well.
Or or to continue that focus, to
Yep.
make sure that doesn't, I would argue that rather than it not being in the strategic plan, that it continues to be a focus, because that problem didn't occur overnight. It will not be solved in a year.
Right, we're not looking to solve new issues in the 5-year strategic plan. If there's something we're already addressing, then that will be in the plan as a strategy or an objective, something we're already doing.
There are some districts that have the same notion that, okay, because we're going to shift and try to open up new opportunities in more areas, how do we keep a handle on those things that have been issues we've been addressing? And what they do is if they find evidence that's become institutionalized, then it doesn't have to be on the strategic plan and create space for more other areas. But you have to make sure that, is it institutionalized in some other way?
And I just want to comment, what institutions, meaning governments, usually do, is you have a strategic plan and you have a bullet. And then instead of creating new things to work on it, they'll say, well, we're doing this, so I've got 1, I've got 2, I've got 3, it's done. So that's why I agree with you. You have to be very careful of, and I think the superintendent said, that shouldn't be on, because then you're doing it. But it's just a matter of how you collect your data. The mention of it is fine, but if it's going to be on your strategic plan and you're doing it, you need to create space for new efforts.
See, but may I, Mr. Chair? Thank you. So I'm just going to take an example. Is this an appropriate time to discuss this?
Yep, go ahead, whatever you got.
Yes? So if we took the example of there are large gaps in performance between African-American students and others, I would say that we are taking some real steps in this, we have and in the coming year to address that. And I would say that it absolutely needs to be a part of the strategic plan, even though we have taken those steps, because it needs to be a focus. And it's not been institutionalized. It's not part of our culture. It's not ingrained in what we're doing, and we know that it's going to continue to be a challenge. So that would be my question. I'm new to this. You have experience. I do not. So, that's just an example for me of somewhere that I would, want to see that would, hold weight, that would.
Well, and let me just say, and I'm not sure how they're going to draw it up, because everybody draws it up, but that would be part of, there was a history, prehistory, decided to do this, and they're doing this, and they're making steps to do this, and they're continuing to do this with the large gaps, and this is what they're doing. But then you have to make way for what is this, because we're doing it. There's companies we've hired, we're cutting checks, it's implemented in the school. If you start writing that you should do that in your plan, and you have 3 bullet points, you've just taken up 1 bullet point.
But what happens when new board members come in and different things happen?
It's mentioned, and it should be that man's job to continue to bring forward, but it's a 5-year plan. So it's
And-
not a 20-year plan.
And just like our 5-year capital plan, you revisit it each year. Just because you're looking 5 years ahead doesn't mean you set it and forget it. you know, I'm not trying to sell you anything, but that's, you know,
I understand
a
that.
strategic plan really should be a living document, you know.
But the
so-
previous strategic.
Point's all well taken, by the way.
The previous strategic plan that we had when we came on, I never saw.
Superintendent's
anything
goals,
about
that's all we had.
it. Yeah, not this superintendent, but
Well, and then they
it was on the
became-
shelf somewhere. I don't even know if they know where it is. But anyway, this one's not.
They
gonna be
forgot
that
it.
way. I mean,
They
this
said it.
plan.
Right. So
Yeah.
can we move
Yeah.
to the
Yep, next one.
opportunities?
Yep. So this is, again, this is outward-facing one. It's opportunities, what's manifesting out there that can create opportunities for us to improve teaching and learning conditions here in Indian River. So, for instance, the first one's more intentional connections with local businesses to build a talent pool would benefit both sides. For example, industry tours or counselors could help create a bridge so employers can go into schools. Now, let me point of clarification here. To recruit, not take our staff, but to recruit students to become staff. So I just want to make sure you had that. I'm
Thank
sure you
you.
probably got there yourselves. But that's an example of opportunities that could put us in touch with more resources to help our efforts here in Indian River and help the broader community, or help the employers as well. So I'll give you a minute to read those over. One of the questions we asked this morning when we worked with the cabinet, was there anything that showed up here that either surprised you or did not show up here and surprised you? Either way.
Are you asking, or are you going to tell us what they said?
Yeah,
What's that?
I'm waiting for the summary.
Are you asking
that a
them the
question?
same question?
Yes, yes. Oh, it was an invitation for you.
Okay.
Well, I won't say anything surprised me, but I do really like the idea of the district and the county working together on a strategic plan. I do know that in some other districts around the state, they do that. And even so far as, like, we would meet with the Brevard School Board once jointly to discuss different meta things, or the St. Lucie School Board, or the three of us actually meet in one workshop to discuss things. So I think that, you know, these are opportunities that I think are good.
And the economic, Mr. Chair, may I? And the economic development, I mean, definitely, you know, we need teachers, and we need teachers who can move here, who have, so their spouses can find jobs. So I think it's really important for us to play a role in that. We're the largest employer in the county. I mean,
And our students can find jobs,
and our
too.
students need jobs. I mean,
Yeah. Vertical plan, or vertical integration.
Places in New York State have a strong regionalization, that they bring together all the major players in the region to try and forge a synergy that is more powerful than any one of them individually. So I don't know, the sense of regionalization might have is similar to what this is talking about too. Okay.
And I would just say in the jobs grant, the county offers jobs grants, but no mention, you know what I mean, that could include students as well.
The interesting thing is the cabinet discussed this morning that a few of these bullet points we already are working on, and we need to just take to another level. For example, the first one, the intentional connections with local businesses. We do have a career and technology steering committee, advisory committee that has a bunch of local businesses and organizations involved, trying to, you know, build that bridge between high school and career and tech ed courses and the industry directly. So we're already started down that road with the first bullet. We do have a lot of different mentoring programs in our schools currently, but are they in place in all of our schools? And what does being a mentor in this school mean versus what does it being a mentor in this school mean?
Right.
So, you know, if we move forward with, you know, work in the mentoring area to try to bolster that or make it more uniform across the district, so we know if we say we have a mentor in this school, what is that mentor doing? You know, what's the expectations to be a mentor? Or if you're a Take Stock in Children mentor, what does that look like compared to being a mentor with youth guidance or something like that? So we're already doing some of these things, but we can definitely take them to another level. And then, partnering with the county, working with the EDC to try to be a factor in that. These are all things that we can do.
And further to Sean's point, when you said, Sean, about working with other school districts, for example, with the mentoring program, I know that St. Lucie County has partnered with Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and they have a fairly strong mentoring program for the district, a plan. And it would make sense to me that we're able to not reinvent the wheel on that, to work with them and see what they're doing that's working and how we could, utilize it here. So I think that's a great point.
Right, and there's significant state funding for Big Brothers, Big Sisters, or not? that
Brothers,
one?
Big Sisters.
Yeah.
But the problem is
Boys
they
and
don't
Girls
have an
Club.
Indian River that I know of.
They have
and
funding too.
I thought they're out of St. Lucie.
They work here in Indian River
Right.
County as well.
Yeah, they still have a presence.
And if we start working together, we can get some money.
So if you're okay, I'll move on to threats. This one again, external facing, what's posing out there that can make the work with the teaching and learning a little more challenging. The first one, local news seems to publish more negative stories about what's happening in the district than positive ones. I thought we saw that come out in different ways in the different sources of information. Now, one we know that media tends to gravitate towards news stories because those seem to resonate with folks for some reason. It attracts their attention. So this is part of just that's what the news industry is. But is there anything we can do to help either offer more balance or to take charge of the narrative ourselves? There's something we can ask when we do the strategic plan. And you move down from there, there's an apparent disconnect at times between what the community perceives is happening and what's really happening. Again, another communication issue. Federal and state policies don't often relate to students' day-to-day learning, creating distractions and noise for schools. Now, the one that kept coming up, an example of this, was state standardized testing. But you wonder, is there anything that we're doing internally that can add to that noise, too? Is it always just federal and state, or is there things, because I know there was a state superintendent in another state had asked their district, said, is it always the state testing, or how about your own testing regimes, or your own practices? Is there anything you're doing that's adding to noise? It's a good thing just for reviewing and reflection. Many students and their families are worried about being deported. I think when we talked this morning, we thought that might be coming from one particular quarter, but perhaps larger. Poverty and crime have grown over the years in the district, and teachers struggle to meet student academic needs. I think we see most districts are seeing their demographics are changing. There's a sense that the district still has not recovered from 2008 cuts due to the recession. We heard that several times. And there's not a strong sense of unity in the community. Many feel there's a culture of haves and have-nots.
Well, a lot of these seem like perceptions. And do the data support these perceptions? Like poverty and crime, poverty perhaps. Crime, it seems, it depends, one, on how you measure crime and which crimes you're measuring. And what was the other thing? I guess poverty, too. I don't know that poverty has necessarily
Mr.
grown,
Frost,
but yes.
as poverty has actually decreased in the state of Florida, it continues to rise in Indian River County. So we're kind of unique in that area, and I think that's something that's very important to make sure that we recognize.
Based on census or based on free and reduced lunch?
Based on census, is my understanding, sir.
And Bobby, Dr. Moore had referenced this earlier, is a lot of this is perception, but if some of this perception can be addressed in communications with data that counters it, then that's probably something we want to consider as part of our communication. If we believe there are ones that are really not substantiated by the evidence. Okay, so that's SWOT. That's the 4 areas of the.
Just a question.
Yes, ma'am, Laura.
Can you go back real quick?
Yep.
So tell me again, how did you come up with this list? Was it when you went out and you spoke to the groups, and these items kept coming up?
It came from all sources, but the meeting with the 26 some odd groups, the meeting with the interviewing with, and also with the document review. But perception data was a lot, and we kept hearing things that came up in more than one instance. It came up more from more than one group. It came up multiple times. We thought it was worth noting. One thing we're doing here as a leadership team, though, is which things can we corroborate and say, yeah, this should help really influence our plan going forward, or which ones do we think, okay, that may have come up a couple times, but there's other things that are coming up. So we need to weigh and see what are our priorities. And like we said, when we think about what are our goals and our areas, we have to choose from all these different things, which ones are we going to focus on? Which ones have the biggest bang as well?
I would say that the first two things underneath threats are tied hand in hand, right? That seems to be the disconnect at times between what the community perceives is perhaps, what they're reading.
I guess a good question to ask the board at this time, is there anything on there that you feel is not a threat?
Not a threat or something that we should be
No,
addressing?
of those things that have been listed now as a threat.
That wouldn't be for us to say. I mean, if
Right.
somebody
No,
feels they're going to be deported, I can't help
Right.
that.
No,
But if
that
that's
you've
an
not-
area that I don't want to address, that's a different
Let
story.
me rephrase it, that you've not heard
Oh.
from your constituents or heard from community people.
I think it's just overwhelming to see that there are some things in here that we just can do nothing about. And I think that's just the struggle of school districts in general, or of education in the United States. There are some things here that we can just not affect. So,
Can I ask you what you feel we can't affect?
deportation,
They're worried, so what could we do?
That's
I
not-
kn- No, there was something that I had sent, our attorney a couple of months ago was,
About declaring ourselves as a sanctuary district?
well, Palm Beach County was the superintendent was trying to go out and meet and reassure families, that their children are safe. So, I don't know we can't prevent that, but if they're worried about it, maybe
that was
I
a
could
great
see-
question. I'll go through
Yeah.
it. Let's go through it. The local news seems to publish more negative stories of what's happening in the district than positive ones. We've asked repeatedly about that. We will continue to discuss it, but not a lot we can do about that right now.
Well, and I have a question
I
on that.
disagree with that. I think when we look at rehiring a new public relations person, I would hope that we would have someone that would be able to get the information to the reporter on a timely manner and have a better relationship with the reporter than, and maybe help.
I cannot sit here and agree with the fact that somehow our public information officer not having a good relationship with the reporter has caused all of the negativity and the misinformation and the damage. I just can't give him that much credit.
Mr. Frost.
I do have a question. Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chair. And some of this is soft and squishy, and I like numbers and firm and data. So having worked in an organization that have metrics around positive versus negative stories, do we have any data that suggests, the word seems here, I'm a politician, so I love that word. However, as a policymaker, I'm better with 3-to-1 ratio, 6-to-1 ratio, getting 6 positive or even down to not just reach, let's talk impressions. 10,000 positive impressions versus we know we're only going to get 3,000 over here. All right, good, we're still in the
Wait a
good,
minute.
so.
I got to bring you back to your election days and people's election days. One piece of mud
Right,
needs 3 positives to make up for
7.
that. So let's just go back to that.
it's 7.
Or
But
7,
yeah.
excuse me. So there you get
It's
your
expensive.
answer.
But but that's the question is, do we
Sean?
track this and do we have metrics from other districts with whom you've worked?
This is, again, this is some part of an industry standard. Just media in general tends to
Oh,
put out more
absolutely.
negative. So again, I don't know if this is brought up several times. I don't know if it's necessarily unique to Indian River, but it's one that was recognized and one that I think is put out there. Is this something that we need to address? I'm not saying it's unique to this. Now, according to metrics, is that something we want to do going forward?
Okay.
How do we want to allocate resources? Do we want to allocate resources to track that? But no, this can be well established as an industry to whole. I've heard 8-to-1 is from negative to positive in the media. That's what I've heard.
So you're lucky to get 1 positive placement for every 8 negative pieces?
I'd referenced Sean Akers' work earlier, and if you look at Sean Akers' work about what's called the happiness advantage, that's what society is working up against.
Right.
Is that there are a lot of negative influences. What do we want to do here in this district to address this, whether it's unique to this or it's general in nature? Is this something we want to confront going forward?
Get a student newspaper, reporters, and ask the local trusted newspaper, TC Palm, to run their articles every week. That would probably be a good help. But I just wanted to interject that, going back to my earlier, when we could spend time going through this, but I see we have emergent themes coming up. But what I wanted to say, just to point out, because we could go down, we could find 100 of this, there's one in there that says about the academics. Where was that? The poverty and crime have grown over the years, that the district and teachers struggle to meet the student academic needs. But when you look at the scale that I was telling you, you see that the staff, that was the lowest rate, was the academic. So everything is apropos with who you're asking and what you're asking, and these threats are just a group of a certain amount of noise that came forward in this group, and that we probably could have a nice, thoughtful conversation on this, but maybe we should get to the emergent themes, because we could have a lot of philosophy with a lot of these, and again, it's just a certain amount of number that made it to this, so
I'm going to call that the segue part of the table right there. I was going to segue on to the next part.
yeah,
of that.
I just would like to kind of
That
get
okay
into
with the
some
board,
meat where we
Chairman?
could really roll up our sleeves.
Okay, so, and Dale, I think you brought this up earlier about themes being part of the strategic planning process. So that's what we had taken a stab at the themes that seemed to cluster around all this information. It looks something like that. I think you have a document that looks like that.
Can anyone read this?
Yeah.
Laura, do you
It's even worse up there.
All right,
so
young lady.
I'm using my hand.
have a full page?
I guess it is.
Yeah,
Trying to figure that
I can
thing
use
out.
this
In one of your thinner packets,
Okay.
I need a
there's a full
2.5.
page.
Executive
Right.
summary.
Executive summary, thank you.
Page 5, right there.
They're much more easy to read.
How do it show up in the packet? They show up much
Oh,
smaller.
this is
in the
much
packet.
better.
Yeah, but it's fine, we have it here.
Okay.
Thank you.
All day this.
Right here, general themes, thank you.
So maybe one of the first steps would be to look over, I think there's 6 themes there. Look over those and see if they seem to, at a high level, seem to make sense. And then we can start talking about, are these the 6 themes? Are there others? Do we want to consolidate some? Why don't you take a look and see and get a reaction about the 6 themes as they've been initially identified?
That's,
These aren't rank ordered, are they?
Not necessarily, but student success is number 1, is the first one,
Right.
and that would, there's something kind of appealing about that.
Right, that's not unreasonable. But the others, I mean, it's
Right.
not based on any response.
Correct.
patterns.
No, sir.
Okay, thank
Correct.
you. Okay.
thank you for grouping these, by the way. I mean, I'm glad that these rose to the top. Makes it easy, it makes it easy for us.
Dale, we're waiting for you guys to regroup them.
Can I just ask a question of the structure on this information? So the 6 themes are listed, and then I see the objectives. We're going to have to leave it to, I guess, this is where the back end of it, the actual strategies or measurable, how will you measure these outcomes are going to have to come from the superintendent.
Right, so one of the things that I think we talked about earlier, maybe we didn't, is that after we've hopefully identified these 5 or 6 themes, these areas we want to focus on, and maybe some potential goal, statements, the cabinet and staff are going to go work on, okay, how do we measure our success in these areas? And then come back and bring that back to you in the draft of the plan to say, these are the 5 areas, these are some focus, some goals or targets in those areas, and these are what, things we're going to do to measure our success in those areas.
have one other question. Is there a theme here? I mean, 6 is a fair amount, it's a large amount. Sometimes 4 is 4 to 5, so I think 6 is a quite meaty project, and I'm fine with that. But I'm curious, was there any other sub-themes that didn't make it to there? I would like to be aware of that. Or these just all kind of fell into this?
There was another one that came up in conversation, which should finances be pulled out as a separate one, but that's the only other one that came out. That's just, that,
I'm glad
we
I
had
asked.
talked about that, and that's exactly.
I'm glad I asked, thank you.
Yeah, and actually, the efficiency in finance, it wasn't an emerging theme, but we know it's also important for school districts. So our question is, do we embed that in the other goals and objectives? Because we know your constituents would be important. And the other conversations, as Dr. Rendell mentioned earlier, could some of these be consolidated? And we'll talk about that a little bit more, because you mentioned 4 might be better than 6. We went ahead and listed 6, but there's a couple of these that could be consolidated to reduce it to 4, and you still have goals and objectives around them. But again, we want input from you about whether or not we do that as we go forward.
When would you like that?
We're going to do that today.
Okay.
Ms. Justice?
In what capacity do you mean finance? Can you define exactly what you would mean?
Usually school efficiencies, good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, allocating resources efficiently and effectively. Typically, that's something that has been written in superintendent's goals for years.
Right.
And typically, when there's strategic planning going on, either board members have put that in there, or that's been themes that have emerged. But typically, you might see that in a strategic plan. But it certainly didn't emerge as one of the popular themes, which I credit, again, your school district. Evidently, people in your community, again, whether this is a broad base representation or they didn't feel that that was an issue in your community. And again, I applaud your leadership and the transparency that you've created around that topic.
Well, I could see that in culture under fiscal discipline and transparency
Yeah, you can put it.
as a cultural, as a part of our culture.
Ms. Orr?
Was that a question on our survey about finances and efficiency?
There was not an explicit question about that, correct.
But in our interviews and then also in the open blanks.
Well, the one thing I could say that actually is, again, back to the voters, the referendum passed. So we have a very understanding community. Thanks again to the community and a very understanding community. So they're partnered with us, and that referendum would not have passed if they didn't understand some of the shortcomings of how our finances are. You know, maybe some people don't, I'm going to be honest with you, as a legislator, I did not know until I actually got involved with the school district that we, out of all the other, the county commission and the cities can set their millage rate, and we cannot. So that is something that I say every time I can, just so that the community understands that, not that you want, any one of us want to sit up here and start raising taxes, but when you can't to cover the unfunded mandates, I think our community, a large part of our community is very well informed and understand that. So, but I feel that Mr. Frost is correct under culture, or a thought of culture, that would be a great umbrella theme to place that, because they do think it holds value and we should be respectful of it.
So when you asked if there are any other themes, the only other themes that we thought was what we typically see in other places, but like Bobby said, they didn't show up in our information gathering. Even when people had a chance to be free and share. Technology was another one. We typically see another, but that didn't come up as a need area for this. But it's one we sometimes see in other future plans.
Because Bruce does such a great job. And again, thanks to the taxpayers.
Thanks to the taxpayers to allow us to do that, because that's definitely an area where we're underfunded.
So I don't know if we want to, what we did this morning is kind of go through each of those themes to see if it should stand on its own or be combined. We had some ideas this morning, Cabinet did, about combining one or two of them or having them stand on their own. So
Mr. Chair.
before we dive into that, do we want to take a short break, Mr. Chair?
That was not-
look over in the chart paper, we have summarized the 6 themes that have been identified so far. At this point, if we don't suspect there are any that are missing, then maybe we look at these 6 and ask, okay, are these 6, do they all merit standing on by themselves? Do we combine some of them? Does one go underneath another one? Just in terms of structure and formatting and direction for Mark and the cabinet team to then know what they're working towards when they bring this back to the board for reaction. We spent a little bit of time this morning, we're working cabinet about, are these 2 related, and if such, does one go in underneath the other? Or are they both important enough in terms of just the work itself, or for other reasons that they should stand alone? So that's one we want to ask you right now. How are you feeling about student success standing for achievement and performance excellence and so forth versus equity and equal opportunities? What's your reaction to that?
John?
Thank you. Philosophically, and I'm on record saying this, I think that we should have the same high expectations for every group. I'm all for tracking subgroups and their success levels, but I think that breaking it out separately, just for me, philosophically, as a goal, is problematic. I think every student, regardless, should be held to high expectations, and then provided the supports around those expectations. So, that's just my thought.
Ms. Justice?
I would agree with Mr. Frost and say that I think that some of the interventions that will be used to make sure that there are equal opportunities for every student will benefit every student. So some of those areas that we see that we need to address, I think that overall it could be, student success.
So if I'm hearing right, then a bullet point under student success over to the right, where you have attendance data and all that, that would be a continuation of equal opportunities for all students.
Correct.
So if you're asking for feedback, then I would agree to combine equal opportunities as a bullet point or strategy for student success.
What did the cabinet say, just out of curiosity?
Yeah.
Actually, they were split. There were,
Split.
we
Right
actually,
up the middle.
we didn't make a decision. We just discussed the pros
Motion
and cons
failed.
of both.
To be honest, we looked at looked at this from several different angles. For one, the statements that were just made, if we're going to expect success or have high expectations for all of our students, then that should fall right in. If we're taking measures to ensure the success of this academic or ethnic subgroup, that should work for all ethnic subgroups. So folding equal opportunities or equity or equal access under student success makes a ton of sense. Mrs. Dampier, who's in charge of curriculum instruction, she wanted it under student success because she says, this is our goal, is to make sure every one of our students are being successful. It doesn't need to be set out somewhere else. This is going to be under student success. We also talked about, though, we do want to make sure everybody understands that we're cognizant that we have an achievement gap, that we want to address that. So should it be its own separate, one of the 5 or 6 focus areas, or should it be recognized and monitored and tracked and addressed under student success? We also talked about, does equal opportunities also refer to our staff? We know as part of one of the components of the desegregation order is that we have to have a workforce that is reflective of our student body. So if we take equal opportunities and fold it under student success, that's great for the student success part of it, but then we need to make sure that when we get to high-quality educators or whatever we term, human capital, human resources, high-quality teaching force, whatever, that we then put in there some focuses or goals or strategies or objectives to make sure that we have the goal of having a workforce that's reflective of our student body, and then some strategies and objectives under that, how we're going to do that and how we're measuring that. So we went through this and we really thought the student part of equal opportunities could fold right under student success, but then also we want to make sure we don't lose the side of the fact that we need to make sure that we have a diverse staff, and so that we fold that under high-quality educators or whatever we do with personnel.
Well, I think it could literally be an important sub-point to every single one of these, whether it's communication, strategic partnerships, certainly high-quality educators. I mean, that's something we've we've discussed at length is getting more diversity and particularly high-quality educators in there. So
It's actually a very good point. We weren't smart enough to think of that this morning, so appreciate that. But really, if we did, make sure that there was some component of equity or all subgroups or all communities in each of the 4 or 5, whatever we end up with, focus areas or goal areas. You know, for example, strategic partnerships, we make sure that we're having strategic partnerships with the NAACP and other minority groups. Communication and collaboration, make sure that we're communicating with all segments of our community. Maybe having town halls in different places of the community or coffees or whatever, you know, whatever we decide to do. If it's fleshed out in every one of the 4 or 5 goal areas, then could say it's more important than having its own.
right, it's baked in. It's just who we are.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say is, the way to see that that is and should be up under student success, if you look at your bullet points on the equal opportunities, all of those can be placed under actually almost achievement gap data on your first one. Achievement gap data, you might have that gaps because of mobility rates. You might have, and as I said, so all of those can fit under, from what I can see, student success. So it's very easy to absorb that into that and combine.
Right, because I don't see the teaching component. I mean, while I recognize it as important, it's not there under equal opportunity.
It's not fleshed out there currently, no.
Right.
Are there any other areas that are conceptually related that you think one could fold under the other, consolidated? So now we're down to 5 areas, knowing that equal opportunities will show up underneath each of the other 5. But now we have student success, culture, high-quality educators, community collaboration, and strategic partnerships. Are you good with those remaining the 5 areas?
I'm going to jump in and say I'm very fine with the 5 areas. I wouldn't want to consolidate anymore because they are completely polar in many ways. And I think if you combine any more, you know, I think that we need to be laser focused on each of the 5 points, but I don't see how you would strategic partnerships, then, I mean, you could try to throw that into culture, but culture is going to be broad anyway, so I really don't feel that there's any room to consolidate anymore.
To your point, we played with that this morning of combining strategic partnerships with actually with communication collaboration, but we found ourselves, it didn't.
And I'll tell you why, because when you read under culture, there's a fine, and I'm sure there's a lot of schools, but I'm going to pick one that I'm very familiar with, Pelican Island, where the culture had changed in that school. The culture and the which you point out as positiveness, that culture had changed. And when that culture changed, you saw change. And so I wouldn't want to mix that with strategic partnerships, although they might go hand in hand and help for success. It's totally different because strategic partnerships are so much more with funding and areas that the school district can't do. And they, you know, they bring so much to the district in all the areas of as you talk about finance, that has to be cut. Those strategic partners allow our students to have, I want to say, you know, school districts, including ours, almost get down to the no frills because of the money. Yep. And all those strategic partnerships allow us to have all those things that the older people like ourselves were brought up on. The musics, all those good programs start getting cut because of money when you're focusing on raw academics. So I think that that really needs to be alone. But as I said, for the culture, I think that I could, you know, that is a change maker. So I really think you want to keep that as a goal, you know, or plan on itself.
Ms. Justice.
I would say also with the strategic partnerships, I agree with you. I think it does need to remain separate. I think it's very important, not only in how many different things, extended learning opportunities and different things that they provide for our students, but also in recognizing the fact that when you partner with the school district, it is an important partnership that needs to have a lot of, that needs to have a clear focus and needs to have objectives, and it needs to not be, can't be careless in that partnership, right? It has to be something that, you know, our students deserve, that we create and maintain really strong partnerships, and for me as a board member in the next 4 years, I'd really like to see those partnerships strengthened so that we don't have people who dabble in our students' education or in programs, but that are really true partners. So that's really important that that remains separate for me.
Dr. Rendell, which area would improving school climate be and district climate to have more of a positive, we've talked about this and you had sent out something in your
Yeah,
Rendell
so
report.
this morning we talked about does it remain just as culture or should it be climate and culture? So school climate and culture or district climate and culture. So there's ways we can measure that. Obviously, one of the areas would be discipline rates, stuff like that, turnover rates and stuff like that. So culture and climate can be student safety, student emotional well-being, but also staff safety and emotional well-being. So, the culture and climate area could be, the statement I think there is staff and students thrive in positive learning and work environments where they feel safe, supported, and celebrated. So, that's a great statement for that area. For culture, it could be culture and climate. And then we could put measures in there to say, okay, how do we measure whether students and staff are feeling safe and supported and celebrated? So, that area seems to be one of the ones that is validated the most by the feedback that we got from the community, both in the face-to-face meetings, focus groups, the survey. People want to make sure that our students are safe and secure at school, and we want to make sure that there's a positive working climate. So that's an area that, I think it's going to stand on its own for sure, and it's going to have some measurables in there to make sure we're doing what we need to do.
I like that idea. And then under equal opportunities, where would we measure to see how we are going for unitary status? Would that be under the equal opportunities?
Yeah, there's a bunch of areas that we already do monitor, so that we would build them into the strategic plan and say, hey, these are some goals that we're going to have, these are how we're going to measure them. So, for example, the work we're doing to increase the number of students from minority groups that are in academically challenging courses. So the number of ethnic minority subgroups that are in AP, IB, and dual enrollment. So we're already doing that. We're starting to measure that. So that would be a goal under there. Under the student success focus, for equal opportunity or equal access. But again, either in that area or under culture would be where we monitor disproportionate discipline data. So again, if we said we're going to make sure that equal opportunities is addressed in each of the 5 areas, then under culture and climate, it would be, do we have a disproportionate number of African-American students or other minority groups being suspended? So it's going to show up everywhere if we're purposeful in how we do it.
We're tracking outcomes, not just inputs, right?
Well, I think the inputs are going to be the strategies,
Okay, right.
and then the outcomes will be the measurables.
Very good.
And we talked about this morning having process measures and outcome measures, and that the outcome measures ultimately is what we need to be accountable for. The process measures will help us know if the strategies are getting the effects that they are designed to.
Very good.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, I'm sorry, so we do have consensus from the board that the equal opportunity would be rolled under students' success, is that, or underneath each subgroup, that would be a part of each, where are we with that?
It's a good clarifying question, because we need to know that as we write when we do the next steps.
Here's my proposal. The bullet points all make sense under student success. However, I think that it should be as a bullet under each of them, kind of as you were just outlining. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that the direction is clear enough with staff, and they're smart enough that they can take it.
Okay, I'm supportive of that. I just like
Yeah.
to say, in this process, I'd like
Good
to make.
question.
Okay, I'm supportive of that.
As Mike said, our goal is to get consensus today, so I think we're getting consensus on that point for sure.
So was I correct in writing that up on the chart paper?
Yeah, I thought you already achieved that there were 5 themes now, and
Okay, I was just making sure.
made it
And equal opportunity would be under each one of them.
Yep.
Okay.
But to Mrs. Justice's point, the specific bullet points, I think, are important to maintain under student success. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Was there a consensus for us to also put fiscal transparency as part of the culture? Is that something that the board, I'm supportive of that. I know Mr. Frost brought it up, so is that something that we move forward with in that area?
What was that?
You like that?
Mr. Frost made a suggestion that as part of the culture, there would be fiscal transparency, that would be something that, am I correct in?
You're correct.
Okay.
I'm looking for
Is
someone
it fiscal-
else to weigh in.
Is it fiscal transparency or fiscal responsibility?
Or stewardness.
Yes,
Good
yes,
choice.
stewardess, whatever you
stewardship
want to,
of
you know.
resources.
yes.
Stewardship of resources.
No, no, no.
Because it's,
Transparency is very important to me. I'm sorry. Yeah, fiscal efficiency, however you want to say it, or good stewardship of resources is important. However, for me, and the constituents with whom I speak, the transparency of the process is just as important.
So, and I would say like something that would be important to me going forward is we have that budget book. It really clearly outlines exactly how all of our funds are spent. And we have the CAFR as well. So I would like just to see that to continue to be something that's a big part of our district. I know that you spoke to the fact that finance was not something that a lot of people brought up as a concern. I think it's because of those things. It would just be important that would be, again, something that we would maintain.
Well, we have to maintain the CAFR, but, because first of all, we get awards on it every year, and I have to say kudos to Carter Morrison, and that's part of that news media thing, that should be definitely touted, but if you're just looking for a way to bullet point culture, it would be fiscal transparency and responsibility. Bingo.
Ms. Orr?
Would that go under communications, though, and collaboration, because we're communicating what we're spending the money on, we're being transparent, and we're communicating that to the public and the,
Are you asking me?
I'm just asking.
I actually think it can show up in both places. I think the practices would be under the culture and climate, but we need to have communication mechanisms under communication as to how we're going to communicate what we're doing in a transparent manner. So it can show up in both places. There are a lot of things that are actually going to show up in more than one bucket.
Carter made a suggestion related to the fiscal transparency. Carter, you call it resource?
well, just something to think about, that you would have a main bullet, stewardship of resources, and yes, you would still maintain your fiscal transparency and responsibility under there, but what I was thinking of is a little bit more broad-based because, for example, environmental resources, how do we treat and care for our environment? Such as our recycling program, I know that is very important to some members of the board, and I think that's something we need to continue, obviously. So it's not only just how we manage our financial resources, but also our environmental and economic resources. There's something to offer. Just thinking about it under that umbrella.
One of the things, Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting when we were in African American Achievement Plan meeting was the question was posed again, like, what is it that you want your students to have when they graduate? And one of the things that was brought up was we want our students to be good citizens, to have citizenship, right? To be involved in the political process, to understand their place in the world. And I think it's a really good point you bring up about resources, because we do want to have students coming out of our schools understanding their impact in the world, and whether that's academic or if that's, environmental. I think it's an interesting point in graduating good citizens in our community.
Wouldn't that be a bullet point under student success?
You're going to get that because, well, and it depends on whether the bill passes or not. Well, it depends on whether the bill passes this time or not. But there's civics literacy as part of it, and that's, I'm sure that.
And they'll teach recycling there?
They might. They'll teach well, you mentioned being involved in the political process. So to that point, yes, and there was, I think it was actually stripped out, something on financial literacy as well. That was stripped
And
out.
one of the things that we advised Dr. Rendell and the cabinet this morning is, again, to be narrow in terms of you don't want like hundreds of measures, and you don't want to have hundreds of objectives. So just because something may not appear in the strategic plan necessarily doesn't mean it's not happening either in the school or the building. So again, this is really about prioritizing, laser-like focus, Dale, if I can steal your terminology there. So the strategic plan's about that laser-like focus of the next 5 years, what we're going to do. But by all means, it's not everything we do every day.
But to that point, if you don't draw attention to it and measure it, does it really matter?
What gets measured usually gets improved.
Exactly.
Right. So,
So,
Dr. Rendell, so under student success, would you see that we would add here, students reading on grade level, that's a goal that we want. If it was a goal to improve literacy or reading on grade level for secondary students, would it be under student success here? And also, improving our innovation in STEM program, would that also be under here?
That would fall under that bucket for sure. Yeah, it would be under the student success goal area or focus area.
Okay.
And that's, I think, what we were kind of talking about. You have to have a broad student growth measures. I'll use as an example, because if we name 5 things at this table and we forget another 5 when it goes to print and it's finally, does that mean that we don't do it? And so I think, like you said, because we do so many things, like if we talk about the transition program at Wabasa School, I mean, where is that in here? Or if we talk about the career and technical, where is that in here? And we're going to get bogged down. Each one will be like the chain of Bob Marley or whatever. And you have to give some leeway to what bullet point do you put it under, and that's a continual growth. Because we have a very long list. We couldn't even remember them all in 2 and 3 sittings. I don't believe.
Right.
So we would do ourselves more damage if we it's like, I think, Mr. Frost, you always say, when you start naming groups or you start thanking someone, you always forget that, I mean, I think we should be focused in a strategic area that we need to improve. And then, again, like you I'm glad that you bring that up. And then we can make sure that we have a bullet point to put it under. But if we start naming them specifically, we're just going to get bogged down.
Well,
And no
that's-
improvement.
That's the thing with the strategic plan. I mean, to your point, you have the big ideas. I mean, you could easily get to like 1.11.1, and then subgroup, and then, pretty soon you have like the whole PMP manual, the project management professional manual. So I think some latitude is given there. The broad strokes are here. The 4 corners are there, if you will. Staff is on point, so.
Okay, so the
Good
5
enough.
areas, equity under each of the areas. And then did we say financial transparency and stewardship?
Fiscal responsibility and transparency, I think. Dale, is that correct? Fiscal responsibility and transparency?
Well, I was just hearing that from, others.
I wanted to get
we
your
all-
exact terminology. I thought that
Well,
was good.
that's what I heard.
Makes sense.
But,
But I think under that, you also see resource allocation and efficiency, and that's where you see programs like the green program, whether it's saving dollars or the planet or both. I think that's-
Transparency is such a positive word of your community.
Absolutely.
and what I wanted to say is, just because, like I said, if I have familiar, we have a mission, but it's not behind us. We got to get that painted up there.
We're waiting on the new branding, see?
Yeah,
That's
oh,
what we're
that's
doing
true,
here.
okay. So, but you have the mission statement, and that is a very broad, it's a very positive mission statement. Now, when you get to a strategic plan, I want to say that's as I said, a real vision in areas that you want to plan for and work towards. But then you have your daily duties, and what I want to say is, I just hope this board doesn't get so into daily duties and separate programs like, Focus and all the different. iReady, and we start, because it's just, you can't, I think you summed it up in the beginning. So I think that it's a really positive that we kind of, and I think I'm very glad, because I'm hearing that we're all kind of on the same, that you really kind of focused it all, and then we're kind of streamlining it, coming up with some great suggestions so you can hear it. I know you have to craft a final version, but I think that you've done a great job with this, and I think that the board's making great progress, with the input. I think it's really, I like what I'm hearing here today. I think it's really good.
Well, we really appreciate your input today. You guys have been very collaborative and given us a lot of great ideas. And as Mike shared earlier, our next steps, another segue there. We're going to draft a plan and bring back to the board. And Dr. Rendell again, for your input, and see if we've actually captured everything. And it'll be an opportunity for you to give some input, I think the conversation was to get some external validation too before we go forward. So there will be a draft again that people are going to have an opportunity to weigh in on at the board level and some of your partnerships too.
Now, the vision and mission were just brought up. Is part of this process, does it contemplate, addressing the vision, sort of the grand aspiration of the district, or the mission becoming these 5 things and rolling that into a mission statement, or?
Usually when we do a strategic planning process, we start with the vision and the mission and all that. But with Dr. Rendell, I think you guys have drafted that last several years, or that's been part of your mission statement. Well, we elected not to have that in this part of the strategic plan. Again, we were scaling it back and making sure it met within your needs and responsibilities. And
So we're not going to have a new mission and
it's going to be the same
branding
one, but
and
it'll be in the
communication
strategic plan, though. It will be in the strategic
The
plan.
mission to educate and inspire every student to be successful seems to be really well reflected in this.
It is.
It
but
actually was a conscious decision not to revisit the mission statement because it is actually pretty darn good. It seems to be on
I
mission.
like it.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I think that this is all great work as we work towards the strategic plan, but when this work is over, then I would like, at some point, Dr. Rendell, will he give then this strategic plan out to all department heads? And then they have to interpret, there's, again, it gets to a mini strategic and a mini, because when I was talking about, they have to get into their goals of objectives to try to fulfill this. And that's the, in the grass work that Dr. Rendell has to do with his people. They have to get in the grass. And so, after this is all done and you've gone home and we've had a plan, then that would be a nice feedback. I would like to hear feedback, how you're going to implement and have everybody pull it together for you so that this is constantly moving forward and we're lifted every year.
Yeah, when we launch the strategic plan, which will probably be July or August, there'll be kind of a second phase where we show who's going to do what and who's responsible for what and how we're going to measure our progress down the line with that. With the current practice of having the superintendent's goals, I present those to you. There's measurable objectives and there's measurable outcomes in there. But staff, then I meet with staff and we say, how are we going to do these things? And they know which things they're responsible for and that kind of thing. So, that'll be a part of unveiling or launching the plan in late July and August.
The big comment that I get about this whole process here is that somebody, they're guiding us towards these Common Core standards. And where is it in here that it mentions anything about that? I mean, I get that on just about every phone call that I get, or email I get. Well, I don't like it because it's headed to Common Core. What? I mean, you guys have been involved in Common Core and some of the other areas.
Well, I think that goes back to one of the biggest threats, us being reported as being a Common Core business. We work with states all across the country, and we help states implement whatever standards they have. And again, we work with people instead of to people. So what we've been doing at Indian River, we've been facilitating your process with your community engagement, with the surveys to get people involved. And today we're here with the board to come up with a final next step. So we're just trying to facilitate the board and your community to create the best school system in Florida.
I just wanted to get that out because we sort of get negativized, if that's a word, because we're headed to Common Core. And I don't believe that, by the way, but conveying that message is not an easy one because the second question I ask the people, or the first question I ask the people that bring that up, well, what is it about Common Core you don't like? Well, I don't know anything about it, but it's bad. It's bad. So I just want to make sure that it's not in this, we're not headed to Common Core, whatever that thing is up in the sky.
You guys have selected your own curriculum. That's not for us to do. It's not for us to come and say what curriculum you should do. That's your decision.
But as we said early on, remember the MAI appraisal, made as instructed. And I'm hoping that doesn't leak into this long-range plan for this district. So, but anyway.
Thanks, Charles, for bringing that up. Appreciate it.
Okay. Sure.
Do you have more to say?
Well, I just want to say that, with the background of you implementing and having strategies for implementing the Common Core standards in Ohio, I think you've gotten, you have a strong background in that. So there's a lot of concerns that you have received a lot of money from Bill Gates, who was one of the original founders and promoters of Common Core. So Common Core is not curriculum, and I think you knew that. It's standards. So, so when I look at this, I definitely look at it to make sure that it's not the mindset of the original creators that created the Common Core standards. So, so for me as a board member, I look at this critically to make sure that we aren't implementing that mindset that the rest of the country is trying to get away from. So, and Florida, we have Florida state standards, which is Common Core standards. So let's set that straight.
We don't set those standards at this level. John?
Thank you. And I understand you do have some experience there, but I have deep experience in 12th grade. But that happened a long time ago, and I don't really think I use too much of it today in preparing this. Maybe some, you know. But, you know, things, just because we've worked with folks in the past doesn't mean that, you know, I'm not qualified to run fuel companies, although I've done work with ExxonMobil. So what I look at is I look at the work product. The work product is such that I don't see, you know, and you and I share a lot of views, so I don't see anything in here that says that this is moving in the direction of Common Core. I was kind of concerned when I started hearing perhaps a sales pitch on social-emotional stuff, and that's not in the final product, so good. Because there was a discrepancy between what the head shed or the district office was saying was more in that realm, in the, you know, that social-emotional learning, Common Core type stuff that's usually tied together. But out in the, you know, on the front lines, as Dr. Mendel says, they didn't really care too much about that. They wanted the academics, and what I see in the final product is a focus on academics and student success. So I'm all in on that. And along those lines of standards, I do have a question, because there is some discussion in Tallahassee right now about possibly revisiting the standards, because one of the reasons we have our own test is because we can. That doesn't tie us to any consortium of tests. So is this, I guess a question is this standards independent? This plan will work with whatever standards may come. The strategic plan will work with whatever standards Florida is using at that time.
You don't see anything specified by name, by proper noun in there. It's just, it should be agnostic to whatever the curriculum or standards are. There's nothing that's prescribed in there.
Your
This
measures
is
will
all process and
Right.
metrics.
Your measures are going to be whatever the state decides to use when you
Right.
use your measures.
So if the measures change, if it's no longer FSA assessment, if it's something else, then that's what we'll be using to measure our progress.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Well, I want to thank you guys, too. This is great. We really appreciate, again, collaboration and your viewpoint. Sean, you had the winning idea today with the equity piece throughout. That was probably the best idea, but
Team sport.
it was a team. It was definitely a team. And Charles, great job navigating. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
Sir.
Okay.
Did we explicitly say what the path forward was, or?
Yeah, I can talk about it.
Put it, read it into the record.
Okay, so this is what we're proposing to the board. Today, the cabinet took notes and listened to what you had provided for feedback by way of what was suggested. And the cabinet constructs strategic plans, the goals, objectives, measures, and strategies based on the work today. The cabinet then will plan for internally and externally communicating the remaining strategic plan timeline. Cabinet then will provide a strategic plan and communication plan back to BFK so that we can help provide the materials as part of the agreement. And then cabinet will bring back to the board at the, I believe, June 27th meeting, what in the next 6 weeks are drafted about the strategic plan and so forth. That includes communication and a vetting plan.
So more than likely, June 27th is a workshop day. We'll have a 1 o'clock workshop where we will present to you a draft strategic plan, all pretty much done, but asking for your feedback and critique and that kind of stuff.
Then vote it up in the next meeting.
Yeah, a month later.
Okay.
So enough time for any changes or feedback and critique.
Perfect. And right before the budget, too.
That's right.
Imagine tying your strategic initiatives to your resource allocation. What
Wow.
a brilliant idea that might be.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, that's good.
Meeting adjourned.